Hello, and welcome to Now You're Cooking with Gas. This video is about activating gameplay abilities using an action bar. This will include using the enhanced input in Blueprints, very similarly to how action mappings worked. First thing, we're going to add 2 more Ability Input IDs. I'm just picking 2 for the video, but you could add any number here. Next, I need to add functions down here. Similarly to how the on-fire ability is set up, I'm adding 2 functions that take the input action value and will send that along just like on-fire ability. The difference is that when we have on-fire ability here, we're binding it to the enhance input component based on the action that is set in the engine with the input action. We are going to be using similar functionality, but we're not going to bind it here. So these functions, which will be available in Blueprints, are just calling this function, which down here calls ability system component, ability local input in either pressed or released. This functionality is still needed for 2 reasons. This is not available directly in Blueprints, and released is still required for auto fire stuff that we want to create. All right, then we'll launch the editor. I'm going to go into input and create 2 more actions. Just duplicate the fire ability. And duplicate that one. As a reminder, these are just Boolean types. And that is set up the default way. And then we need to add it to the input mapping context. So much like this one, we'll just add 2 new ones. Don't know why I reopened that. They need the pressed and released. And next, I'll create some UI for the action bar. I'm going to create a widget blueprint. This is just going to be a canvas panel with a horizontal box. I'm going to throw in 2 buttons. I want this to fill. Duplicate this one. Oh, I'll throw in the spacer. Just make the spacer size of 4. This horizontal box should go at the bottom middle. And we can make it a little bigger. Maybe too big. All right, so in the graph for this widget, I'm going to create a function. Call this assign ability. We'll have an input of an integer, which is the slot. I set up a sequence, because you know I love them. Do a switch on int here. Add a few pins. Just dragging out the button so that I can create a local variable, which will be button slot. So if the function is called with a 0, it'll go through and set button slot to the first button, otherwise the second one. If you were to add extra buttons, you could just add more here. I'm also going to have a input ID. This will be used for give ability from the ability system component. Alt drag that out. So this is going to be set from the enum. So to get that, we can right click and type literal enum, and then the name of the enum, which is eAbility Input ID. We'll set that to Action Bar 1 ability. And you cannot drag that in there. There's no auto convert, but you can use toInt. I duplicate that. Control V or CV. This will be for number 2. Next part of the sequence is we want the button to change the image. So I'm going to call set style. And to send the in style, we can drag that out. Click on make button style. This is very many options. I don't believe there's an easy way just to get access to this stuff outside of this, but this is how we're going to do it. For this, we want normal, which is another structure, so I can drag that out, click make again. And in here, I'm going to be setting the image. So for that, you can take the image. This is a cute little trick. You just drag it into your function, and it will add that input parameter. All right, and lastly, I'm going to have another sequence down here. And this is where we'll be setting the actual ability. For this, I'm going to need a branch. I'm going to create a variable for the gameplay abilities. I'm just going to call it GA plural. This will be of type integer, except it's a map. So it's an integer map of gameplay ability spec handle. So I'm going to call find on that map against the button slot that was sent in. If it exists, then I'll do something in a minute. Regardless of whether it exists or not, which is why I use a sequence, the point of this function is to give ability. Since I'm not directly dragging it from the ability system component, it's not showing up because it's context sensitive, in which case I can get it here. So again, for this, the ability class, I can drag this up to the function. And then alt-click that, because I don't like having lines way down. Call get ability class. Which, oh, context sensitive should go back on. There we go. This is the ability system component, which as well, I'm going to want up here. Rename that one. Just going to call it ASC. And I'm going to reorder it. Just because I like them in the right order, so to speak. Get rid of that line. Oh, same thing here. Just call get image. Get ASC. And the input ID. So basically what's happening in this entire function is this will be called from the player. The player, which I'll set up in a minute, will create the widget, call this function when it wants to assign an ability. It will give the slot, which will be 0 or 1 in this case. It will supply an image. It will supply the player's ability system component and the class of the gameplay ability that it wants to assign to that slot. So it's just setting some values here that we'll use later. We're setting the image to the one that was sent, and then we're giving the ability to the ASC. Since we're going to be managing that ability in this location, we need to save it. So that is what this array is for. I'll get that, call add. This was the button slot. This is the value. So if we call this function a second time and it's the same button slot that's already in there, that's why we have this code. Though if there's an ability that's already in that slot, then we can call the opposite of clear, or give ability is clear ability. Not take, not remove, not whatever, just clear. And the handle, of course, is then going to be this. So that's the setup for this function. I also need to handle the input. So first of all, we have the buttons on pressed and on released for both buttons. We're going to get our owning player pawn. Cast that to the third person character. And from that, we're going to call the on action bar ability function. we also need to include the value. So the value that's being used, and I kept the function the same as the other on fire ability, in case we want to make changes to that later and include that action bar ability to be used from inside the third person character class as well. I maintain this being the input action value structure. So the bool part is all we really need. And this is kind of a union style. So we need to go make. As you can see, it's an XYZ, so effectively a vector, but has also the type being bool, float, vector 2D, and vector. Bool and float will use the X value. Vector 2D will use the first two, and vector is all three, of course. So for bool, we just set this to 1. Need to repeat all of this for release. And it's going to be a value of 0. Do the same thing down here. Now these functions here, these events, are called when you click on the button. So we also want the functionality to include hitting the appropriate key, which I realize I did not set up in the input. So if we go back here to the IMC default, I need to actually press the keys. So ability 1 will be 1, ability 2 will be 2. So much like the way that action mapping worked in Blueprints, you can find the actions through their the variable name. So IA underscore jump, or the ones we just created. That pops open this this very large window with how that we have the IMC set up. Pressing 1 we'll call started. Releasing 1 we'll call completed. So we can set those up similarly to go here and here, and do the same down here. IA underscore action bar 2 ability. Now, unless I forgot something, that's everything for the widget. But it also needs to be hooked up in the player. So in here, I'm just going to remove this old stuff for damaging yourself. For this example, I'm going to use IA jump. When the player hits space, we will do a switch on int. I'm just going to use a random int in range 0 to 2. Two is the max value that's returned, as opposed to between 0 and exclusive. If you're familiar with random functions, it will do that with integers quite often. In this case, we will get 0, 1, and 2. For that, we're going to have our 0, 1, and 2 here. For each of these, we're going to call, first we need to create our widget blueprint. Create widget. This is action bar. I'm going to save that. And add it to the viewport. Back down here, now that we have that variable, we're going to call the assign ability. So I'm going to set this to the first button slot. I'm going to just make this Phys icon. The ASC is our ability system component. And the ability class, our ability Phys. And do the same over here with a slot of 2. Sorry, second slot. I will make this one acid. And the ability matching. Just going to make copies of these 2 more times. Make sure the ASC is plugged into all of them. Change this one to acid. And fire. And this one to fire. And Phys. You can see the action bar in the center there, center bottom. When I jump, it's assigning those 2 values. When I hit 1, acid damage, hit 2, fire damage, jump again, fire damage, Phys damage, and conveniently, Phys damage and acid damage. So being that these are buttons, I can also hit Shift F1. That'll give me my mouse cursor. If I click, so we only set up the normal value. The hover, is the default, which is just a lighter white. When I click that, it's showing the same 2 values. Same 2 types. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video and you would like to see more, you know what to do. If you have suggestions on future content or abilities you would like to see, let me know down below.